Welcome to this deep dive, and we're going to be exploring this really interesting book called Statistical Instincts
Okay.
by Zenson Tran. Um, he's got like over 30 years of experience in this field, turning data into insights.
Wow.
And this book is kind of like his masterclass, like he's sharing all of those hard-won lessons.
Uh-huh.
Now you might be thinking, oh, this is going to be like all equations and dry theory.
Yeah, you kind of think that when you see the title.
Right. But let me tell you, Zenson is all about making this stuff practical and relatable for like anyone.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's less about crunching numbers and more about like building up your intuition so you can kind of make sense of the data that you encounter every single day.
That's great.
Yeah. And he starts by laying out these three pillars of statistical thinking,
Okay.
which are understanding variability, thinking probabilistically, and finding patterns in chaos.
Right.
Now, those might sound intimidating, but he uses like everyday examples to show how these concepts are already part of your life.
I think that's really important because people get really intimidated by data and statistics,
Right.
and they think it's something that's just for experts, but it really is something that we use every day. We just don't realize it.
Yeah, exactly. And so he kind of brings it down to earth, you know?
Right.
So for example, he talks about weather forecasts.
Okay.
Like when you hear there's a 50% chance of rain,
Right.
you don't expect it to rain for like exactly half the day, right?
No. No.
That's understanding variability.
Right.
It means there's like a range of possible outcomes, and statistics helps us make sense of that whole range, you know,
Yeah, that makes sense.
instead of just like focusing on one specific number.
Right.
And then he also uses the example of like weight fluctuations,
Oh, okay.
which I think we can all relate to.
Well,
So if you see like a sudden change on the scale,
right.
statistical thinking kind of prompts you to ask,
Yeah.
compared to what?
Yeah.
You know, was it a big meal?
Right.
Was it a change in your routine? Or is this like an actual trend? So it's about looking beyond just the immediate numbers and considering the context,
It is.
right?
And I think that's the hardest part for people. It's not the math necessarily.
Yeah,
It's like asking those questions that put it into context.
right. And that's where the book, I think, really shines,
Okay.
is that it kind of challenges the way we're often taught statistics.
Okay.
Like, you know, in school, it's all about memorizing formulas and, you know, following these rigid rules.
Right.
And Zenson's like, no, no, no. Like,
Mhm.
you got to approach data with curiosity
Mhm.
and use statistics as a tool for like exploration and questioning, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and a big part of that is getting comfortable with uncertainty,
Okay.
which is something that Zenson himself had to learn.
Oh, interesting.
So he tells this story about a product launch decision he faced, you know?
Mhm.
Imagine this. You're in his shoes.
Okay.
There's a 50-50 chance this product's going to be a flop,
Ooh.
and a 50-50 chance it's going to be a massive hit.
Talk about pressure.
Oh, yeah, big time. But instead of trying to like seek certainty, which is often possible in these situations,
Mm.
he focused on thinking probabilistically.
Okay. Yeah.
So he's asking himself questions like, what are the potential gains if this thing succeeds?
Uh-huh.
What are the acceptable losses if it fails?
Yeah. That's a really good question.
Right. So it's not about like avoiding failure altogether. It's about understanding the potential consequences
Mhm.
and making a calculated decision.
I'm making sure that you can live with any of the outcomes.
Right, exactly. Instead of getting paralyzed by like, oh my God, what if this goes wrong?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, especially if you're not like naturally mathematically inclined, feel that fear when they're dealing with numbers and probabilities.
Totally.
They just get frozen, you know?
Yeah. It's like that fear of the unknown just kind of shuts them down.
Right. Exactly.
So what happened? I'm assuming this product did well given what we're talking about.
Well, in Zenson's case, the product was a hit.
Okay.
But the point he makes is that even if it hadn't been, the value lies in that approach.
Right.
He demonstrates that statistical thinking is less about eliminating uncertainty, which you can never really do,
Right.
and more about like making smart choices, you know?
Yeah.
Even when you can't predict the future with 100% accuracy,
Because you never can.
you can't.
So it's almost like a mindset shift, right? Instead of fearing uncertainty, you learn to kind of embrace it and work with it.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a superpower
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. It is.
to be able to look at those numbers and not be afraid
Right.
and to be able to say, okay, what can I learn from this?
Yeah.
And how can I use this to make a better decision?
Right. Right. Exactly. And so the shift can be like incredibly empowering.
It can.
So in the book, he shows how this like statistical mindset can help you question those attention grabbing headlines
Oh,
we
okay.
see all the time,
Yeah.
you know, like 40% drop
Right.
sounds alarming.
But 40% of what
Exactly.
compared to when?
Yeah, yeah.
So it encourages you to dig deeper and demand context
Mhm.
instead of just reacting to the surface level numbers.
Right. Which our brains are naturally inclined to do, right?
Yes,
We see that headline, we're like, oh my gosh.
panic.
Right. Sell everything.
But then when you actually look at the numbers and you think, okay, what does this actually mean?
Right.
It might not be as bad as it seems,
Right. Right.
or it might be worse, but at least you know.
Right. Exactly. At least you're informed.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. He also talks about not being swayed by anecdotal evidence. You know, those, my friend lost 10 pounds on this new diet stories that get thrown around all the time.
Oh, I know those stories.
Right. And it's like, okay, great for your friend.
Yeah.
But what does that one data point tell you about the diet's effectiveness for everyone else?
Right.
Like, how do you know if that's a typical result or just a fluke?
Right.
And that's where statistical thinking comes in. It helps you see through those anecdotes and ask those crucial questions like, compared to what?
Right.
What's the bigger picture here?
What's the sample size?
Right, exactly.
All those important questions.
It's like having a built-in BS detector for the data you encounter every day.
I love that, a BS detector.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of it. It empowers you to be discerning, to be critical, and to ultimately be more confident in navigating a world that's just overflowing with information.
It is.
Now, you might be thinking, okay, I get the importance of context and questioning assumptions, but how do I actually find those meaningful patterns in all this data?
Right. Because there's so much of it, how do you know what to trust?
Exactly. And that's where Zenson provides you with like a toolbox, you know?
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah, he dedicates a whole section of the book to developing your statistical intuition.
Okay.
And it's all about equipping you with those skills to separate the real insights from the random noise.
I love that.
Yeah, so we're going to dive into that toolbox in the next part of this deep dive.
Okay, I'm ready. So we're diving into this toolbox for developing our statistical intuition.
Yeah, let's get into it. What's the first tool Zenson gives us?
Well, he starts by acknowledging that our brains are naturally wired to seek out patterns like it's in our DNA.
Right, we're always looking for connections, even when they might not exist.
Exactly. And that's where the challenge comes in because not all patterns are meaningful. Some are just random noise.
Right, our brains love to find those connections, even when they might not really be there.
Exactly. And he introduces this concept of overfitting,
Overfitting, okay.
which is essentially when we get so excited about finding a pattern that we convince ourselves it's significant,
Right.
even when it might just be a fluke.
Okay, so can you give us like a real world example of that?
Yeah, he tells this story about a company that was attributing sales spikes to their social media posts.
Okay.
They were convinced that their witty Friday tweets were driving all these sales, but when they dug deeper, they realized that most of their customers got paid on Fridays,
Huh.
hence the boost in sales.
So it had nothing to do with the tweets themselves.
Exactly. It was just a coincidence.
But that's a classic case of mistaking correlation for causation.
Right. Just because two things happen around the same time doesn't mean that one is causing the other.
Right, so how do we avoid making that mistake?
Well, Zenson provides us with a whole set of tools.
Okay, let's hear it.
He dives into the power of data visualization,
Okay.
emphasizing how a good chart can illuminate trends and help you see the story the data is telling.
So we're not just staring at rows and columns of numbers. We're finding ways to visually represent that data.
Right, exactly.
Okay, what else?
He also walks you through understanding the difference between correlation and causation,
Okay, yeah, we need that.
the importance of statistical significance,
Mhm.
and the power of segmenting your data to uncover hidden patterns.
Speaking of segmentation, that was a light bulb moment for me in the book.
Yeah, it's a powerful concept.
Can you remind us what that is and why it's so important?
Absolutely. So segmentation is essentially dividing your data into smaller, more specific groups.
Okay.
Zenson illustrates this with a case study about a tech company that was struggling with customer churn.
Mm-hmm.
They were looking at their overall churn rate and scratching their heads.
Right.
But when they segmented their data by region, a pattern emerged.
So they weren't just looking at all their customers as one big group. They divided them up, in this case, by location.
Right. And they discovered that customers in a specific region were churning at a much higher rate than everyone else.
Interesting.
And this prompted them to investigate further, and they uncovered a logistics problem in that area. Deliveries were being delayed,
Huh.
frustrating customers and causing them to leave.
So by segmenting the data, they were able to pinpoint the root cause of the problem,
Exactly.
which would have been completely hidden if they just looked at the aggregate numbers.
Right. They never would have seen it.
That's a great example of how this stuff can be applied to solve real-world business problems.
It's incredibly powerful.
But Zenson also makes a point of saying that not every pattern will have a neat and tidy explanation, right?
That's a crucial point. Statistical thinking isn't about forcing the data to fit a narrative. It's about being honest about what we know and what we don't know, and being open to adjusting our understanding as new information comes to light.
So sometimes the answer is simply, I don't know yet.
Exactly, and that's okay.
It's a perfectly valid conclusion.
It's better to acknowledge that than to jump to conclusions based on incomplete information.
Right. It's about having that humility to say, I need more data or I need to explore this further before making a decision.
Precisely, and that leads us perfectly into the next part of the book, applying statistical thinking in real life.
Because let's be honest, what good are all these insights if we don't actually use them to make decisions?
Right, it's all about putting this knowledge into action.
Yeah.
So Zenson gives us this framework for applying statistical thinking to make those real-life decisions.
Yeah, so it's not just about understanding the data, it's about using it to make better choices.
Exactly, and he lays out a clear decision-making process, starting with defining the problem, you know?
Okay, so first we need to get clear on what we're actually trying to decide.
Right, what are you trying to achieve? What are the key factors you need to consider?
So let's say I'm trying to decide where to invest my savings.
Okay, great example.
What are some of the questions I should be asking myself at this stage?
Well, you might ask yourself, what are your goals? Are you looking for short-term gains or long-term growth?
Okay.
Are you comfortable with high risk, or do you prefer a more conservative approach?
So before we even start looking at numbers, we need to take a step back and get clear on what we're actually trying to accomplish.
Exactly. It's about setting those clear objectives from the outset.
Okay, so once we've defined the problem, what's next?
Then you identify the key data points.
Yeah.
What information do you need to gather to make an informed decision?
So in this investment example, this might involve researching different investment options, looking at historical returns, understanding the associated fees and risks, and so on.
Precisely. It's about gathering the evidence you need to make a smart choice.
So we're gathering evidence just like a detective.
Exactly.
I like that analogy.
And then you need to weigh the probabilities and risks associated with each option.
Okay, so what are the potential outcomes, both good and bad?
Right. And how likely is each outcome to occur?
This is where we put those statistical instincts to work, right? Thinking probabilistically and embracing uncertainty.
Exactly. It's about thinking in terms of what ifs.
But how do we actually weigh those probabilities and risks? It still feels a bit abstract.
Well, that's where those decision-making frameworks come in.
Okay, the cost-benefit analysis, decision trees, scenario analysis, and Bayesian thinking.
Right. Those tools can help you bring structure and clarity to those complex decisions.
Can we revisit those frameworks and see how they might apply to our investment decision?
Absolutely. So let's start with cost-benefit analysis. This one's pretty straightforward. You list out the potential costs and benefits of each investment option.
Okay.
You might list out the potential returns, the fees, the risks, and any tax implications.
So we're looking at the potential upside and downside of each choice.
Exactly.
What about decision trees? I'm having a little trouble visualizing how those would work in this situation.
Sure. So imagine drawing a tree-like diagram.
Okay.
Your starting point is the decision you're facing, in this case, choosing an investment.
Right.
Then you draw branches representing each possible investment option.
Okay.
Each branch then leads to further branches representing potential outcomes, high growth, moderate growth, stagnation, or even loss.
So you can visually see the different paths your investment might take along with the likelihood of each outcome.
Exactly. And that can help you weigh the potential risks and rewards of each choice.
Okay, that makes sense. What about scenario analysis?
So with scenario analysis, you're imagining different what-if situations.
Okay.
What if the market crashes? What if inflation soars? What if interest rates skyrocket?
So it's a way of being prepared for the unexpected and having a plan in place no matter what happens.
Right. It's about being proactive rather than reactive.
I like that.
And then there's Bayesian thinking, which, as we discussed earlier, is about updating your beliefs as you gather new information.
So as you learn more about the market, about different investment strategies, you adjust your approach accordingly.
Exactly. It's a more dynamic way of thinking where you're constantly evaluating and adapting as the situation evolves.
Got it. So we've got these 4 frameworks to help us make sense of those probabilities and risks. But Zenson also emphasizes that data-driven decisions aren't just about crunching numbers, right?
Right. Your intuition and experience also play a role, especially when you have incomplete information or need to make a quick decision.
It's about finding that balance between data analysis and your gut instincts.
Exactly. And he even shares a story about a nonprofit organization that was deciding whether to expand their services to a new city.
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
They were passionate about their mission, but the data showed that staying focused on their current area would actually allow them to help more people in the short term.
It was a tough decision, but ultimately the data helped them make the most impactful choice, even if it wasn't the most emotionally satisfying one.
Right. Sometimes the data challenges our assumptions and leads us to a better decision, even if it's not the one we initially wanted.
That's a great reminder. But of course, even with the best intentions, we can still fall into those decision-making traps.
Of course, we're all human.
So, what are some of the things we need to watch out for?
He talks about things like paralysis by analysis, where you get so bogged down in the data that you never actually make a decision,
Oh, yeah, I've been there.
or confirmation bias, where you only see the data that supports what you already believe.
Confirmation bias is a sneaky one. We've all been guilty of that at some point.
So awareness is key. By understanding these common traps, we can be more mindful of our own thinking and make a conscious effort to avoid them.
It's like having a mental checklist to run through before making a big decision.
Exactly.
So, we've learned about the importance of statistical thinking. We've explored the tools and techniques. We've even talked about the potential pitfalls. But at the end of the day, it's all about taking action, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Zenson's book is a call to action. He wants us to embrace these concepts and start applying them to our own lives.
And he gives us plenty of real world examples to show us how it's done.
He does it. Those case studies are incredibly inspiring. They show how statistical thinking is being used to solve problems, improve processes, and make a real impact in all sorts of fields.
From fraud detection to supply chain optimization to healthcare improvement.
It's amazing to see the diversity of applications.
And it really drives home the point that this stuff isn't just for data scientists or mathematicians. It's a valuable tool for anyone in any field who wants to make better decisions, solve problems, and navigate our increasingly data-driven world.
Exactly. Zenson has given us a powerful set of tools, and it's up to us to use them.
To see the world through a new lens, a lens of clarity, curiosity, and empowerment.
And to make more informed and confident decisions in every aspect of our lives.
That's what Statistical Instincts is all about. So we encourage you to pick up a copy of the book and start exploring these ideas for yourself. You might be surprised at what you discover.
And remember, statistical thinking is a journey, not a destination. It's about continuous learning adaptation and embracing that all-important growth mindset.
So keep asking questions, keep challenging your assumptions, and keep seeking out evidence to support your claims. The world is full of data, and with the right tools and mindset, you can unlock its incredible power.